Good morning, Bro. We Fellowship. It's good to be here with you. Shabbat Shalom. For those of you who are joining in this Saturday morning, and for those of you who are new to We Fellowship, welcome. It's good to have you here. Today, we are going to take a deeper look into the 10 Commandments and hopefully open our eyes up to some of the things that the Commandments has to offer for our lives, especially coming out of toxic relationships, especially dealing with narcissistic abuse, especially in the way in which the world seems to be going right now. What can we gain, if anything, from the 10 Commandments that was written generations and generations and generations and what seems like eons ago from an ancient people? Well, it definitely can give us a lot of insight. Now, we did talk about the 10 Commandments very loosely last week, so those of you who were with me last week, understand that this is going to be a different message. This is going to be a deeper dive into the 10 Commandments and how to apply them and how they should be applied in our lives. I'm anxious to get into this with you. All right, let's go ahead and open up in prayer and then get started with this deep look into the 10 Commandments. Heavenly Father, we thank you so much for this time of gathering this morning. Lord God, we ask that you would open our hearts and prepare our minds for what you have to say to us. Help us understand where we are in this world, who we are in this world, and what it is that you are asking of us and how you would like to lead us. Give us your instructions in this life. Open our minds and our hearts. In Jesus' name. And everybody says, amen. Shabbat Shalom, everybody. Let's go ahead and dive right in. And I'm anxious to get into the 10 Commandments with you because, like I said last week, we loosely cover the 10 Commandments. Basically, it was more, last week I was just talking about how they approached the situation, the people. They went to the mountain and they were there. Their hearts were prepared. They fasted for 3 days and they received the instructions. But we did not look carefully at the 10 Commandments. And I wanted to take some additional time to really look at these as to the value behind the commandments given by God, the value that's still within these for your life and for mine. So to begin with, I want to start with a quote by A.W. Tozer, who says, "In the knowledge of the holy, what comes into our minds when we think about God is the most important thing about us." I'm going to say this again. What comes into our minds when we think about God is the most important thing about us. So when we think about what God is, that tells us a lot about who we are. So personally in my own life, I see God as loving and awesome, yet at the same time, terrifying, right? This is just my perception of God. Loving and awesome, yet terrifying. And now watch this. This view I have of God of being loving and awesome allows me to do the work of a loving and awesome God. But watch this. At the same time, the fact that I am terrified of God, because I am terrified of God, and I should be, as should you. And it's this terrifying factor that causes me to watch my step in this life, what I say and what I do and how I act around other people. There's this element of being in terror, and a lot of people will mistake this terrifying terror as being afraid of other people, and that's not necessarily true. I was contemplating one of the reasons why I couldn't open my mouth and fight back against narcissistic people and siblings, the way there was something inside of me that kind of wanted to. I was cussed at, called names, demeaned, devalued, and there were parts of me that I didn't know how to react in the situation. And watch this. The particular people or person, the same is true in your life, but in my life, is not really a scary person. The person was about yay tall. Physically, I have no doubt in my mind that I am well more equipped to deal with that situation. Not only that, but I'm just going to be honest with you, a lot of that, the onslaught, if you will, of that narcissistic abuse, the mouthiness, the darts, the fiery swords that were stabbing into me was coming from a girl that was a lot smaller than me. A lot, and most of these words, which were fighting words of hate and anger, yet it seemed to me that I could not even get a word out to stop it, it was as if there was a hand covering my mouth. And again, I bring this to your attention because as I look back, is what was I terrified of? Was I terrified that this person would hurt me physically? No, that wasn't what scared me. What terrified me in the situation is something else. It's something deeper that I'm terrified of. And I relate that to my relationship with God, because I know that no matter what that person's doing, no matter what this girl is saying to me in this particular situation, I am terrified at the thought of stepping into this territory of meeting her in this hostile, aggressive place, because that's not what my Heavenly Father is looking down and watching me. That's not what he's rooting for. He's not rooting for me to chop down this narcissistic tantrum that this person's throwing. And so there's that element of terror. And now watch this. Narcissistic people, even those who profess to be Christian or religious, they miss this completely. They lack one or the other. They lack loving God for real, or they lack the terror of God. And this is why narcissistic people are so wishy-washy. They will one moment be doing whatever they want to do in life as if there is no God. That means they don't love God. Or they'll be going to church and say they love God, but then they'll treat people and viciously lash out at people, attack people, physically hurt people, call people names, whatever, and they do that as if they have no fear of God. There's no terror in their heart, which means for most narcissistic people, they really, truly don't believe. I believe that if you're going to believe in the Lord, then you need to both have the love, the awe, if you will, but you also need to have an element of fear. Not fear of other people, but fear of God. That fear of God's going to stop you from doing things that you ought not to do. Now, the 10 Commandments are still relevant, even today. All right? And we're going to go ahead and dive right into these, and I'm anxious to get into these. Now, these 10 Commandments are going to tell us a lot about who God is. Now, the intro I just shared with you was about how we see God, right? And the most important, which is the most important thing about us. All right? So if you live loving God, believing God is awesome, and you also fear God, that says a lot about the person you are and who God has called you to be, which is a great thing. So now, let's get into the 10 Commandments. And the purpose of these 10 Commandments, all right, real quick before we talk about these, the purpose is to set people apart. The purpose of the 10 Commandments, I'm going to read this, what I wrote earlier today, is to set the people apart. God is saying, you have lived according to the world. This is what God is telling the people now that they're out of Egypt. And he's telling you the same thing and me the same thing. He's saying you've lived according to the world. Now, you've gotten yourself involved in relationships according to the world. You have, and as a result, you've taken that path. You've experienced what life has to offer down there. You've walked that journey, and you've come out of it with nothing. And how many of you can relate to that, right? So you've lived according to the world. You've lived in that fancy house with the narcissist. You've gone on those fancy dates. You've done these things that you thought would bring excitement and awesomeness into your life. And now here I am, empty, hurting, suffering. By the way, this is no different than how the people who came out of Egypt felt and how they really were. Yes, they missed parts of Egypt. They were uprooted from their homes. They were uprooted from, at least they had good food to eat. It wasn't just manna. They had bread and wine and whatever else, but they were oppressed. And so God has brought them out now saying you've experienced that life and you were never satisfied. No matter how much wine you had, how much this, how much that, you always were oppressed because you were oppressed. And so now God is saying, I'm going to give you rules to live by that's going to take you from being in an oppressive world to now being my people. And you have to understand that in order to be my people, you can't look like Egypt. You can't look like the rest of the world. One of the things we have to understand about living for God, and this is true for me and it's true for you, is that we have to make the decision it's going to be one or the other. You cannot live according to the world and according to God. You will fail every single time. All right? I deal with one-on-one conversations all the time with people who meet others and get involved in weird relationships and whatnot at church, in the church, and then find themselves in this hellhole not knowing what to do. Well, we met in church and we're doing this and we're involved sexually and this and that. We're not married but we stopped going to church and I want to go to church, but he doesn't want to go to church. She doesn't want to go to church. And it's a big confused mess. And that's what happens when you're teeter-tottering and when you have one foot in what God wants you to do and one foot in the world and trying to please that worldly, carnal desire, which we all have. Our biggest fight in this life is our carnal desire. And God is telling us right here in the 10 Commandments, you've got to fight that carnal desire. And this is the rules I'm going to give you to do that. All right, so here we go. Again, the purpose of the 10 Commandments is to set people apart. So if you want to be set apart from narcissism, if you want to be set apart from the ways of this world, then you will listen to these 10 Commandments, absorb them, and allow them to sink into your mind of what God is really trying to say. By the way, these 10 Commandments still apply. Jesus did not get rid of these. He fulfilled these, but he did not get rid of them, right? These are rules to live by. Here we go, starting with number 1. The first commandment, you shall have no other gods before me. And I'm going to read the second one as well. Thou shalt not make unto thee any engraven images. All right. So at the time, these laws were very important because the Israelites needed them to become a stronger nation amid all the people in the world. The world, when we say the world, meaning just society, culture, nature, is always looking for something to idolize. Is it not? If it's not Britney Spears, it's Justin Bieber. If it's not Justin Bieber, it's Floyd Mayweather. And what when we say idolize, we mean now we create all these people who aspire to be this and that and follow this person and follow that person and become their idol. And where's God in any of that? Non-existent, by the way. Right? The idol and the engraven image is something that people seek after. There is a natural desire in every human being to seek after something to become like. It's what we do. That's how we live our lives. And so what God is saying is listen, if you're going to do that, since this is what you want, I put a longing in your heart to follow something so that you're not alone, so that you're not just by yourself. Follow me, right? Don't put it in this person or in that person or in this idea or in that idea, because that's only going to lead you nowhere. It's going to lead you nowhere. You're going to come up empty every single time, right? And so for this reason, God is saying, pledge your life in a way, in an allegiance to be loyal and obedient in respect to God. First and foremost, have no other gods. In a world that wants to idolize things, in a society and culture that wants to erect monuments, at the end of the day, these things crumble, these things die. One day, bombs may be dropped and blow all these things to kingdom come. Nothing on this earth will stand. Nothing will last on this earth. No people, no places, no things. Nothing here is timeless. The only timeless entity is God. And so follow that. Worship that, right? This is what God is saying. So those first two are super important, and that applies to us today, more now than ever. We are in a place where people scramble in culture and society to find something to follow, something to worship, something to idolize. If we're going to be set apart as God's people, if we're going to be set apart and not get involved in narcissism and narcissistic abuse and not fall into those pits and those traps, then we have to understand this, that first we need to cut ourselves away from the gods of this world and the idols of this world in order to look towards God, right? That's the only way we're going to avoid the pitfalls of this narcissistic society and the world that we live in. The third is this, the third commandment. Thou shalt not take the name of the Lord thy God in vain. How many of you have heard this one? Now, I used to think that this meant using the name of God for no reason. When I was younger, growing up, if I said, "Oh my God," I remember my dad was swift to yank me outside and pop me right in the mouth. And I remember hearing, "Don't use the Lord's name in vain." And so I grew up believing that, well, that's what using the Lord's name in vain is, right? It's saying things like, "Oh my God," or "Oh Jesus," right? How many of you hear that? How many of you heard people say Christ for no reason? And I would say that this could be a way of using the Lord's name in vain, but I have a better understanding of what using the Lord's name in vain really truly is, having come out of narcissistic abuse, having experienced the abusive, malevolent nature of narcissists who, again, either don't love God or don't fear God, yet instead they do what narcissistic people do, which is weaponize God. And now I have a deeper understanding of what using the Lord's name in vain. It wasn't until I experienced the daggers of a person who hated me come at me after cussing me out, calling me names. It happened to be that same, that girl I was telling you, by the way, who would come at me when I would say, "Stop calling me names and stop cussing at me," who would then proceed, because she knew that I loved the Lord, and she would say things to the extent of, "I'm going to be sure to pray for you, Kevin, and your ignorant values. I'm going to be sure to pray for you and how stupid you sound. I'm going to be sure to pray for you." And the truth is that behind these empty statements of narcissistic rage is no desire to really pray. There's no desire. It's the narcissist's ability to take this idea and concept of prayer and use it as a weapon with no desire to pray. Use the Lord's name as a weapon, and I've heard people do this. There are people out there who will go through a divorce, and in the divorce, which is nasty and ugly, and I get it, but some people in the divorce will start to resort to saying things like, "Well, you're this and you're that, and at least I have God on my side." And it's like, listen, God's not on either side in this. It's a horrible, tragic thing. But when somebody resorts to using God as their crutch, like a side-by-side little warrior to destroy somebody else, that is completely misusing and misunderstanding the nature of God. And it's through this and through experiencing this and witnessing this in my life that I now have a deeper understanding of what the Lord's name in vain really means. It's having somebody come up to me and say, "Kevin, I'll be sure to pray for you and your ignorance. I'll be sure to pray for you." And I have one of them say, I'm gonna pray that the Lord leads your family, Kevin, because you're incapable. I've had that said by a narcissistic person. And when I think about that, I remember when I first heard it, I was speechless. But inside, I wanted to ask, are you really praying for that? I mean, really? Is that a prayer that God has put on your heart to pray for my ignorance? I mean, because that doesn't sound like the Lord that I worship. And it's through this questioning that I was able to perceive and then understand, no, this person has no desire to pray for me at all. This person's coming at me with hatred, with animosity. And they're using prayer and God as their weapon against me. This is vain. They're using God and prayer to elevate themselves and position themselves above you and over you. That is using the Lord's name in vain. Many of you have experienced this. And so this is what I wrote down here. After dealing with narcissists, that using the Lord's name in vain is in the selfish positioning of a narcissistic person with God as a crutch. So using the Lord's name in vain is the selfish positioning that a person puts themselves in using God as a crutch. Again, it sounds like this: at least I have God on my side. says the person who wants to attack somebody else. I'll be sure to pray for you and your faults in life, says a person out of their own narcissistic rage who doesn't want to look at their own issues. In these things, there is no real desire for praying. It's just an attack. This is using the Lord's name in vain. And when you experience that, you can walk away and maybe enter into a real prayer. And the prayer should sound like this: Lord, have mercy on their souls. Have mercy on that lost person's soul. Or deal with them. Deal with them, Lord, because I just can't, right? That's number 3. Number 4, remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. Now, this is my number 1 issue today, folks. This is a difficult one for a lot of people in a society that tells us that the hardest workers succeed. You got Will Smiths of the world out there saying things like, I will not be outworked, right? I've heard Will Smith say that in an interview. And so we've become the society and this culture of sleepless people, nonstop grinding, right? It's about the grind. I grind 24/7, 24 hours, 7 days a week, grind, right? And it's become normal. And we've been told that this grind, this is how you become successful. The Western world mentality is grind it 24/7. And I am guilty. I am here before you, the Royal Fellowship, saying I'm guilty of this. I work a lot of times endlessly trying to achieve something. And when I read this again, I said, whoa, Kevin, you've got to stop. When we work like this, we become completely self-absorbed. And that's the thing that I've ran into as well. And I've discovered it's absolutely true. And when you become self-absorbed because of this constant 24/7 grind, you're ineffective. Because when I'm in that 24/7 grind and self-absorbed, I'm not thinking about how to deliver the most important message to you. And everything always seems like it's behind. And there's no ever feeling like you're caught up. How many of you can relate to this? This is life on 24/7 grind. And the Lord is saying as a law, as a commandment, the Lord is saying here, don't do that. Don't do that. Don't 24/7 grind. There's not. The Lord is saying, I don't even do that. And I created the dang thing, everything, right? So again, if we go back to the very first 2 commandments of not having any idols before God, and thou shalt have no other gods before the Lord thy God, then we need to understand that if we are in this mentality of a 24/7 grind, then we are in fact putting a God and an idol before the true Lord. Because the true Lord, the true God, our Father, is saying, don't do that. I don't do that. Look to me. Don't look to what Will Smith is saying. Don't look to what The Rock, Dwayne the Johnson, The Rock, don't listen to their 24/7 grind ideas. That's idolizing them. That's idolizing the world. That is the direction society is going, and we wonder why narcissism is sweeping the entire world right now. We wonder why people are angry, aggressive, hostile. And it's because of this idea of trying to chase after these other idols and these other people who say work 24/7, grind all the time. And so people grind endlessly without sleep, going nowhere like a hamster on a damn wheel, right? Just running in circles, getting nowhere. Of course people are upset. Of course people are angry. Of course people are going to become bitter. God is saying here, don't do that. Remember the Sabbath. Keep it holy. So not only take a break, but in that day, in that time of taking a break, give that time to God. Devote that time to God. Devote that time to worship. Devote that time to personal service. And Jesus expanded on this too. Not working, keeping a day off doesn't mean not to give to people, not support people, not to help. Jesus healed on the Sabbath. What it's saying is detach from your worldly grind. Don't detach from the self-absorbed grind. That's all it means. and reserve this day for like what we're doing right now, coming together, encouraging each other, building each other up, free of our grind mentality. This is a different mentality of coming together in love, not thinking about what's going on out in society and out in the world, but thinking about each other and how we can sharpen each other and lift each other up and love each other. This is what this day is for. This is a day of rest. This is a day of rest. All right? Number 5, honor your mother and father, the 5th commandment. Honor means to love, and I know this is difficult. This is a challenging one, but it's not. Listen, Royal We Fellowship, I have gotten this one. I figured it out. I'm going to do my best to share this with you right now. Honor your father and mother. All right? Children, honor your father and mother. Honor means to love and respect them while you depend on them only. Now, watch this. Watch this. Yes, honor and love, which means to respect your parents while you are with them. That goes without saying. They are wiser, smarter, because they're older. They've seen more of the world. Great, fantastic. This doesn't mean they're good people. It just means it is what it is. They're raising you, feeding you. If they're shoving food in your mouth and putting a roof over your head, freaking honor them. And some of you are saying, well, that's all my parents did, and that's all they're good for, and they did nothing else, and they've ruined me, and I get all that. My parents did too. But at the end of the day, while they stuck food in my mouth and had a roof over my head, I have to find some way to respect that. Even if they neglected me, even if they did not show up for me, even if they missed my birthdays, even if they didn't show up for my baseball games, if I'm survived by just the breadcrumbs they gave me, I need to find something in that to respect, okay? But watch this. Watch this. This does not mean, nor does it change God's first instruction. You see, these are the 10 commandments. However, God gave an instruction, the very first instruction, long before these commandments came into play. And do you know what that instruction was? We've said this time and time again, and I'm going to say it to you right now. That instruction, everybody who knows what I'm going to say, let's say it together. Therefore, a man and a woman, by the way, shall leave thy mother and thy father, and what? Become united to a brand new person. To what? Form a brand new family, and the two become one flesh. This honor your mother and father does not negate that very first instruction. And that very first instruction does not negate honor your mother and father. If you want to live the idealized version of this, you'll have both. You'll understand this principle. You'll understand what I'm trying to tell you. Find that you respect, and many of you right now, let me start by saying this. Many of you right now are already out from your mom and dad's house. You no longer depend on them for your bread. You're no longer there to get breadcrumbs. You're no longer there under their roof. At least you shouldn't be. If you are, hopefully it's temporary, right? And if that's you, then you should already be at that place where you're under the first instruction of God, which is leave. And leave means leave, by the way. Detach. Walk away. Detach. Become unified elsewhere, a new family. And it doesn't matter if it's not a husband or a wife. It's being unified to a chosen family. Jesus made this point perfectly clear in the New Testament when he looked and pointed at his disciples and said, this is my family. This is my mother and my father and my sister and my brother. This is my family. So do you see that if we're in this life to do it right, honoring thy mother and father does not negate the very first instruction, which is to also leave thy mother and father. So if you have the two of these together, you will live a long, prosperous, and stress-free life. You honor your mother and father while you are under their care. You leave your mother and father when you no longer need their care. Both of these. One doesn't negate the other. We've confused them. This is why I'm so ramped up about this, is because we've completely confused them. We've taken honor thy mother and father, and we think that spans over our entire existence, and it keeps us living down the street from our mom and dad, unable to move on and find a brand new life, right? That's ridiculous. And as a result, we're all messed up. People are divorced, not because their marriage was a failure, but because their moms and dads wouldn't stay out of the marriage. And their brothers and sisters were in there throwing all their nonsense, and the marriage failed. Listen, I know this firsthand. I had to get the heck 5 states away from family members for that reason, right? So there's a lot of truth to that. These do not negate one another. Honoring your mother and father while you're under their care, but also the other instruction, the first instruction, is to then leave them at some point. So I hope that this makes sense to you. Again, that's a deep one, and I'm glad that we're able to get to that. Commandment number 6, thou shalt not kill. Now, God wants to protect human life. Why? So that human life can prosper, so that people can carry out purposes and that God has, and the purpose and plans that God has in his heart for people. And so it's important that we shouldn't kill that, right? If God has something he wants to do through a person, that person then needs to go out and do that thing. But we also need to understand that this is not just physical. We later see that it's physically, mentally, and emotional. Killing of any kind in this life comes from a person's heart. A killer is a killer. And many of you have come face to face with killers. I'm going to just say this straight up. A lot of the narcissistic people that you've dealt with truly are killers. Why do I say this? Well, chances are that if they killed you with their words, if they were willing to just destroy you and deteriorate you with their words, make no mistake about it, if they lived in a society where they were not afraid of any police, jail, law enforcement, and they had a weapon handy, they would have killed you physically. Why? Because it comes from the same place. Jesus made this point in the New Testament. He said, you've heard, thou shalt not kill, but I tell you, anybody who says to his brother, Rakah, right, or it translated means you idiot, right? And obviously every now and then we want to say that to some people. I get that. But Jesus is implying those who really want to dig into others with their words, I mean really. That's the same as killing a person. And how many of you have walked away from narcissistic people feeling like you just were killed? I know I did. You know, again, when I dealt with the narcissistic people and their name calling and this and that, I felt killed. I felt like as though, you know, that, especially that girl that wanted to tear me down with those words, I felt she wanted to kill me. I just did. It felt that way. The words were so vicious and nasty. And in that moment, had she been any more empowered or emboldened and perhaps didn't fear for anything else around, she would have used any tool or weapon just to get her point across. And so for this reason, I believe number 6, thou shalt not kill, which later also includes thou shalt not kill with their words, right? Our words are, in fact, weapons as well. So we need to keep this in mind. Number 7, the 7th commandment, thou shalt not commit adultery. Husbands and wives, be faithful to one another. Adultery is a form of betrayal. I believe that, you know, if the overall rule is to love the Lord thy God, then we also need to understand love your neighbor as yourself. You commit adultery, when you commit betrayal, then that's throwing onto that person the experience that God experiences when we start to worship other idols. And this happens in marriages all the time. We leave one of our, you know, you can leave a spouse feeling completely betrayed, that there's more worthy idols to be worshiped elsewhere, another woman or another man, right? Number 8, thou shalt not steal. No one is permitted to take something that belongs to another. Not only is it God's law, but it is a basic law of the society we live in, right? There's always going to be thieves. There's always going to be people who steal, right? We are not to be one of them. Again, these rules, well, I'll say it as soon as I finish this last one here, or the last two. Number 9, thou shalt not bear false witness. This means do not tell a lie. Don't tell stories that are untrue about people. Don't gossip. This is a big one. Listen, there's people in church that do this nonsense all the time. Gossip, make up stories. Well, look at Sally Sue and what she's wearing. Did you hear about this? Did you hear about that? Turning the house of God, the house of worship, into a gossiping, lying circus, right? Breaking the commandments that God has given. So don't tell stories. When you tell a lie, you hurt yourself as well as others. And soon people stop trusting what you say. You know, I've heard so many lies by narcissistic people and family members that I probably at this point couldn't even carry a conversation with any of them and believe a single word out of their mouths. Right? It hurt. It hurt them. It hurt the relationship. And it's probable that it just never gets recovered after that. Number 10, you shall not covet. Covet means to want something that belongs to someone else. A person who covets may be led to break all or most all the other commandments. And this is true. Coveting, which is desiring what other people have, it's the root. Coveting is the root of envy. And at the root of envy, wanting what other people has is a root of so much evil and animosity in this world. Narcissists are plagued with a covetous nature. They want what they don't feel they have, but feel they are entitled to. Even if that means it's your joy, your spirituality, your love, they want it. And they feel entitled to take it. They're covetous. They covet. And when you think about this, this is what drives narcissistic people to curse you, to want to cancel you, to want to call you names. You know, I've been talking lately, or not lately, but for those of you who don't know, there's a pretty famous podcaster out there. His name is Joe Rogan. He is a podcaster that's just an open-minded individual. He says bad things from time to time. He does. He admits he's not perfect. He makes mistakes. We all make mistakes. But he's not deliberately out trying to hurt anybody. Yet there is a part of society that is striving to tear this man down, deplatform him, take his career out from under him for the simple reason of coveting. How dare him be so successful when he is so flawed, which translates into, that's not fair. We envy his success, right? It's I would say, if anything, I'm dare to say this, but the socialistic mindset is a very covetous mindset. It's not fair what they have. I want it too. So redistribute it. Make it so that I have exactly what they have. And I can see how that would never work, because there's no end to the covetous nature of people desiring what others have. And then, because then it could become, well, I want that person's wife because she's beautiful and I want that. So get rid of him. You know what I'm saying? So there's no end to coveting. And I can see how number 10 can cause all kinds of problems. It can cause all the commandments to be broken. So deal with coveting. Now, that wraps up all the 10 commandments. And again, one of the things we need to understand about these 10 commandments is that the purpose of these, again, is to separate you, to separate people from the world. You're going to look at these things and listen to these things and say, Kevin, What God is saying here is these are things that happen in the world. God did not just make these up and say, these are things you know nothing about, and so I'm going to help you understand. No, God is saying, this is how you lived your life. In Egypt, y'all were sleeping around with different people, and they probably were. You all were coveting what each other had, and you fought and you squabbled over who had more food and who had more wine and who had a hotter wife and who had more clothes. You tried to cancel each other in Egypt. You had your cancel culture. You tried to deplatform those who had more of a voice than you. You've tried to do this. God is saying, this is how you lived your life. You stole from each other. You used my name in vain against each other. This is what God is saying. You put other gods before me. You put your life in Egypt before me. And the Lord is speaking this to you and to me right now through these 10 commandments and through this episode. This is how you've been living your life. You have been coveting other people. You have been bearing false witness and lying about other people and making up stories about other people. You have tried to come at people, tried to deplatform people, tried to spread rumors about people. You are not honoring your mother and father. You've been trying to live a 24/7 grind and not resting and becoming useless to people who really need you. You have worshiped false gods, false idols. You have dressed accordingly to what society and to what the world tells you. Right? God is saying, this is what you've done. This is what you do. So I'm telling you, if you want to be blessed, if you are done living that life and receiving nothing out of it, because that's really what all that stuff leads to. It leads to nothingness. And so God is saying, I've heard your cries. You're tired of doing that and getting nothing. So if you want to be different, follow me now and do things differently. These are the commandments that you're going to live by to be my people, no longer Egyptians. The Royal We Fellowship, these are the rules to become blessed in this life moving forward and to stop and to stay away from the narcissism in this world. That's all I got for you. I want to thank you all. Bless you all. The rest of this week, we'll be back next Saturday, next Shabbat at 9 o'clock a.m. for more Royal We Fellowship. Enjoy the rest of your week, everybody. Blessings and have a great day.